Welcome to the 8 Billion Project, where we're on a mission to make an impact by discovering and sharing the purpose of every person on this planet. I'm your host, Lisa Florida. Enjoy today's episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 8 Billion Podcast. I am your host, Lisa Florida. And today, our special guest here on the podcast is Jacquie Murrell, also known as Lady J. Lady J is an author, youth family mentor, speaker, life transformation, bounce back, quote unquote, and business coach. She's a media personality, serial entrepreneur, and community servant leader. She holds 2 degrees and several certifications. She is the definition of what it means to bounce back after multiple traumas and overcoming life's hardships that seem impossible. She has overcome many traumas and challenges that include, but are not limited to, domestic violence, rape, multiple suicide attempts, near fatal brain aneurysm, and much more. Yes, she has overcome it all. Her education and life experiences have given her a powerful and unique set of tools to help others conquer the impossible. Welcome, Lady J, to the 8 Billion Podcast. Thank you for being on our show today. How are you?
Thank you. I am great. And yourself?
I am doing well. Actually, even just reading your bio, and I did have a chance to talk to you prior to us doing this interview, and you have definitely been a person of bouncing back on so many levels. I mean, just from your bio alone. I'd like for you, if you can, to kind of share with us a little bit about your story before I go into any of my questions.
Okay. My life has just been I'll say it's been a roller coaster ride, but it's also been a life full of blessings and grace, extraordinary circumstances that led me to extraordinary blessings. Being a product of, or I'll say being the exception to growing up around drugs, alcohol, domestic violence, things of that sort, being subjected to sexual abuse as a child, also abandonment by my parents, and a host of other things that led to deep depression and anger and several suicide attempts, homelessness, and then the cycle continued into my adulthood, getting into domestic violence relationships myself, being a single parent, just trying to navigate life, the best I could with what I had, and then learning how to reach out for help. So going through just traumatic experience after traumatic experience after traumatic experience, from my childhood all the way up into adulthood. But with each experience, there was a lesson in it. There was some growth that happened as well. And understanding that while a lot of it wasn't a result of my own, I'll say, decisions, it was circumstances that helped shape, make, and mold me into who I am, and that prepared me to be equipped with what I needed to fulfill my assignment that God had over my life. It wasn't pretty, didn't feel good, but it was necessary. So, and here I am now.
Well, I mean, like from here, you obviously survived so many things between, like what you said, domestic violence, rape, multiple suicide attempts. You know, in some cases, other individuals have experienced only one, and it was very traumatizing. I mean, for you to be able to truly bounce back was amazing. What were those? I mean, I'm assuming that, and from our conversation previously, it started at a young age. Am I correct? Like your sexual abuse, did it start at? Did you say age 8?
So, sexual abuse started at age 11.
Age 11.
I was molested for the first time at the age of 11 at a friend's house by a man that I did not know. I was told it was my fault. So, from that point on, by my own parent. So I was told that, it was my fault. I should have did this. You should have did that, and it was a very, very traumatizing, very scary situation, very scary. And from that point on, I became this child that was I had the mindset, okay, I need to protect myself because nobody else is going to do it. Because at that point, I didn't have a father, the household that I grew up in was, up until about the age of 5, when my mother and father was together, was extremely toxic. It was dangerous. It was not a place for kids at all. So, and then at the age of 15, I was raped by someone that I knew. Wow. And at the age of 16, I was kidnapped and raped by a complete stranger off the street. I do not know how I made it home to this point. I remember every single thing that happened to me. I remember what I wore. I remember everything about that day except for how I left and how I got home. But then I can remember, what transpired when I got home. So, and at that point I was living with one of my cousins because I was homeless. So yeah, that it started at the age of 11.
Wow. So like a lot of these things have happened, like it was just a series of events of, especially starting at a young age, right? Like I've had other podcast interviews where I've talked to other people that have been molested when they were young, and it was very painful. It affected their school. In some cases, they wouldn't tell their parents. And then when they did come out with it was a similar story. Not that they were blamed for it, but they were told to, not, not go to the police, that it would bring shame to the family and all this kind of stuff. From that young age of you being sexually abused to all the way being, raped. And I know this is such a sensitive subject. So I really thank you for being able to be so open with the podcast and the audience. Like, what are the things that were running through, like what you were saying, you had to just protect yourself. When was it really that you started getting in touch with God, or you could feel him speaking to you?
Okay, so that didn't happen until like around my early 20s.
Okay.
Because I had such a traumatic childhood experience, and I pretty much was on my own since the age of 15. Uh-huh. I was looking for like somebody to save me, because at that point I had started being addicted to prescription drugs. I was a sex addict. I was using my body just to feel things, and the man that I got with, we ended up getting married, we had kids, but that ended up being even worse than my childhood experience. I would rather have experienced everything in my childhood again than to go through what I went through with him. Every form of abuse you could think of, I was subjected to. Every single form of abuse, verbal, emotional, mental, physical, just, it was horrible. And it wasn't until I started going to this church and I started to understand what it was to have a relationship. I already knew who God was. I knew what it was to be saved, things of that sort. My grandmother instilled that in me at a very young age, but I didn't really truly understand or grasp the concept of relationship and how that is extremely important and impactful in situations like that. Like, I didn't understand how I could get through this, you know what I'm saying, in the current state that I was in, until I started going to that church. And so I enrolled in a program, and it wasn't until my last suicide attempt, when my older children were 6 months and 1 year old, where a light bulb just kind of came on. And that was the first time I really heard God like speak to me. And so, while laying in the hospital bed on the psych floor. And so at that point, I was like, okay, whatever it takes, I'm going to do. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care how painful it is. I have to do it, because now I'm responsible for 2 lives. And I had to, or the question was posed, like, is this the life that you really want for your children? Do you really want them to go through the things that you went through? Do you really want to leave them in this situation? And my answer was no. Do you want to be better, than your parents? Absolutely. So, because at one point I was told I wouldn't be able to have children. So, so they were miracle babies, and I had some very rough pregnancies. So they were miracle babies, and there was no way that I couldn't live with myself knowing that here I am trying to commit suicide. I'm going to leave them in this situation. So that was the point where I really started to delve into what it meant to have a relationship with God, and understanding how to connect with him, how to spend time with him, how to start finding out who I am in his eyes so that I can better understand what my identity really is and understand that it's not tied to my circumstances. It's not tied to my parents. My purpose in life isn't tied to any of that. They were just vessels to get me here. So I'm here for a purpose. And I didn't understand then that everything that God was allowing to happen to me was for that purpose. But of course, later on, you find that those things out. So yeah, in my early 20s, around like 21 to 22 is the age that I really started to delve into and start to research and understand and listen and be mentored about what it was to have a relationship with him.
Now, you and I talked before. Was it immediate? Like, was it a dialogue? I mean, because remember, when you did say that you had a conversation with him, you were in the psych ward, right? And automatically, that is an automatic thing when someone tries to commit suicide, is they are automatically brought to the psych ward for evaluation first. So was it more like you prayed and then you understood these things, or were you already starting to have a dialogue with God?
So no, so I before this happened, so this particular day, the day that I tried to slit my wrist, I was in a state of uncontrollable sorrow. Like I was so, it was just like everything from the time that I was born up until that point had just continued to be compounded on top, one thing after other, one thing after another. And it was like something in me just snapped. It was almost like I was having an outer body experience. My children were screaming and crying. It was, kids can sense when something is wrong. And they were just begging me to pick them up. And I could hear, but it was kind of like muffled and they were so far away. And I was just like in my own world. But up until that point, I was begging God, pleading with God to help me, save me. And I didn't realize that at that point, my husband at the time had become my God. Everything that I did was to please him. When he would say something to me, when he would, when he would do certain things to me, he would taunt me and torture me and, in all different kind of ways. I would look at self and say, okay, what do I need to do? Or beg him, for his attention or to stop, or what can I do to change me? Everything was to please him. Everything. I had stopped praying, had stopped going to church. I grew up in the church, I knew what it was to pray. And so, but at this particular day, I was crying all day. I think my eyes were so almost swollen shut. I just couldn't stop. And then I just said, okay, God, I can't take this anymore. If you won't take it from me, I have to get rid of it. And so that is where the dialogue started. And that moment, even though I did not hear him, when I lived maybe like a half a block away from a payphone. So my husband would leave me at the house. I had no car, no way of communicating with anyone. He kind of isolated me from everybody. So I walked to the payphone, left my kids in the playpen where they couldn't, crawl out. And I walked to the payphone and called his mentor at the time and told him to come and get my kids. I don't want them in the house with a dead mother. I'm going to kill myself. Like this time, I'm going to slit my wrist and I'm going to kill myself. So I need someone to come get my kids. And I did not know at that time that he was going to call the police. So he called the police, and when I had the knife to my wrist, the police and ambulance just bust in the house with him, like at the exact moment. And so that was God answering me or, saving me at that moment. Now I didn't realize or connect the two at that time. But when I got to the hospital and they were asking me all these questions, I really couldn't answer. I just was shaking my head. I was non-responsive. I was like just crying, and I was silent. And at that time in my head, we were having this dialogue, and I was like, Lord, what do you want me to do? And he, like clear as day, I heard his voice say, I keep telling you no. You keep trying this, and I keep telling you no. The answer is no.
Yeah. So he's like, you're not ready to go yet.
Yeah. He's like, I don't care what you try. The answer is no. So what are you going to do? And at that point, I was reminded of the Moses. For some reason, Moses popped in my head. As many times as Moses get
Because
out
Moses
of
could have gone
Zorin
in your
to
head
deliver the
that one
message to
time,
Pharaoh,
right?
it's like, listen, I don't care what you're talking about. You're going to do what I said do. so then, and then I heard a question like, do you really want to leave your children behind in this? And so I felt guilty at that moment because I wasn't thinking about them in that moment. I was just thinking about getting rid of the pain.
Yes, I was just going to say that because the pain is so much from just like the compilation of all the experiences. You just, doesn't it like, and I really sympathize with you for everything that you've been through. But when it goes from like sexual molestation to rape and then going into an abusive relationship and then the mental games, right? Sometimes it is more even the mental games that get you more than even the physical abuse.
Oh yes, definitely. I cannot tell you my book, when people read it, they're like, what? You lived through this?
Right?
It's I get into some very gory details. So I do tell people to please be mindful if you're going to let your teenagers read it. It's very explicit in detail. I paint the picture as if you're there with me watching everything that happened to me.
Wow.
So I don't mind telling it because there's so many people that are suffering in silence. Maybe their story is not as, it's not as tumultuous or painful as mine, but they can relate.
Oh yeah,
So
for sure.
they can relate. And so at that moment, when you're a child, that's a lot to take in because I wasn't just going through abuse as a child. There was neglect. My mother tried to discard me. Well, she did. And then she put me out. My father left. The things that we were taught when we were kids were just not things the kids should be being taught, learning how to cook crack cocaine and all of this other stuff. It was crazy, looking back on it. And I won't say that every single day was bad. Don't get me wrong. We did have good days. We got to play outside, we got to do certain things, but underneath the laughter was, pain and trauma. So as a child, when those things continue to happen and then your parent just decides to check out, you have to step in now because I have younger siblings. So helping them with homework, make sure they ate, combing their hair and being the protector now. It was very difficult. It was a lot for a child to take, to take on. At the same time, having to go to school, trying to keep covered up what's really going on, using that as a way of escape. And then you get into adulthood and you just want somebody to love you. You've been used up. You let people walk all over you. I did not like me. I did not love me. I saw myself as less than like the dirt we walk on. So I allowed myself to go through what I went through for 5 years with my first husband. And my other relationships after that, they weren't any better. They weren't as bad as as that relationship, but
they progressively got a little bit better.
Yeah.
But I mean, Lady J, you were literally still in your early 20s when you tried to commit suicide, right? When your babies were like only 6 and 1. So,
yes.
I mean, even for me, when I look back at them, because I'm in my 40s, right? Even I look at someone in their early 20s. I mean, to me, that's still super young. So everything that you've been through, even in just a 10-year window, it would almost seem like you couldn't even come up for breath before the next thing happened, before the next thing happened, right?
Exactly. The first attempt was at 14 years old. So the first time I tried to commit suicide by swallowing a lot of pills was at 14. And then I tried twice at the age of 15. And each time I tried something different. And I tried methods that weren't going to be like really messy and where I could do it and kind of die in peace. So, there was pills, there was drinking cleaning fluid, and there was, stabbing myself in the stomach. There was, trying to cut my wrist. So, yeah.
Like, and then when you tried to attempt suicide in your early teens, like 14, 15, were your parents there? I mean, I know you said that there was a lack of presence in your life. Were your parents there? Who were you living with at the time?
So at that time, I was with my mom, but at that time, we were living also with a registered violent sex offender. My mother married him. At that time they were not married, but they were talking about getting married. Nobody wanted to believe. That's another thing too. Being a child and you're trying to tell people about what's going on. Nobody believed us. Nobody believed us. Like my mother, just painted this picture that we were just rebellious kids. Meanwhile, our family knows like this is not how we were raised. Like we're not rebellious or bad kids, and like nobody would listen. And it wasn't until it was too late, until the police and CPS got involved, when one of my siblings went to school and said something to a teacher. They have to report it at that point. And, then everything hit the fan. And then it was too late because damage had been done, and I come actually from a family that is full of generational trauma.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't tell you how many people in my family have been subjected to rape, molestation, mental health issues, because we refuse to accept that these things are happening to us and going through that. And we don't understand the impact it has on our kids. Like, even though your kids aren't present when it happened, you pass those things down to your kids. And at some point, my mother, I think she just had some sort of mental, break. She had lived in this fantasy for so long, where she started to believe it. And I don't like, I love my mother. I don't have any animosity or anything towards her. I forgave her a long time ago, my father and everybody else who had a hand in whatever, happened to me. But I had to accept that they are who they are. They had a life before me. Some of those things happened to her, and people can't give you what they don't have. Mm-hmm. So she didn't have the support. So she couldn't give the support. She didn't know how. But just like I did, you could have reached out and got the help you needed or tried to figure it out the same way I did. It's all about, what's important to you and your strong will, like how strong your will is. Because I don't excuse or I don't use that as a justification for what she did or didn't do, but I understand. So that made it a little bit easier for me to then start the process of forgiveness after my godmother taught me about like what forgiveness really is and why it's necessary and how it works. Yeah. So yeah, and I could sympathize with the things that she went through, with the things that my father went through, understanding that I chose the path that wasn't the easy path, but I knew that it was necessary for my own personal growth. I didn't want to stay stuck, and I didn't want my kids. I wouldn't be able to forgive myself knowing that I had a hand in raising my kids in the same manner that I was raised and around the same things, and then understanding that they too may go down that same path.
Yeah. So then, I mean, that's amazing to be able to rise above all of that. You definitely are the bounce back. They call you bounce back queen.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I just like listening to your story for the first half of this podcast. It's been amazing. Like, so then then fast forward. Okay. So you end up getting out of the psych ward, and then that's kind of where you started having a dialogue with God. But did you say that when did you get inspired to write the book?
Okay. So that happened a few years later, 2010. So before that, I started the program at church, and it was a program for, I forget what it was called. But it was like this 12-step program where abused people and the abusers went through these classes to help them, overcome the trauma or address maybe the trauma that made them start, I'll say, abusing others as well.
Okay.
So I went through that class, and while it didn't fix everything, it definitely helped, because I had never had anybody take the time to ask me, was I okay, or care about my mental or emotional well-being. And so once that happened, I started to connect with, or God started to bring different people in my life that became family, because at that point I didn't really have any family that I really interacted with, because I started to reach out for help and talk about the things in my family. You don't do that because you're not supposed to tell anything. What goes on in this house stays in this house. Okay. So I have always been the type of person, though, that if I need to, I'll stand alone. Like, I don't mind doing that. So in 2010, God had me write out my story. And at first it started out as a therapy for this class. And God just had me write out the story. And in 2 weeks, I had 2 books. Like my whole, and when I say my whole story, I'm just talking about the meat of the story, because there's no way I can put everything in the book. It would be like 2 Bibles probably. But so I started writing that, and there was one part of my story that I had never uttered a word to anybody. Like, they knew something happened, but I wouldn't say what. And that was the night that I was kidnapped and raped. When I got home, super late, my aunt was like, "What happened to you?" Like, my clothes were kind of, messed up, and I was crying, and I wouldn't tell anybody anything, because I was taught that, hey, these things are your fault. You got into a car with a stranger because you thought it was safe, because there were other young ladies in there, and he was acting like a father figure, and they're gonna crucify you. You know what I'm saying? So I didn't say anything. And this was kind of therapeutic. This was very therapeutic for me, because I had never put it out on paper. I never told anybody about it. I never told anybody what happened to me at that night. And so then when I was done, I said, "Okay, God, I'm done." I wrote it out. Then he said, "Okay, release it." I was like, "What?" No.
Believe me.
Absolutely not.
Believe me, Lady J, that was happening to me last year. When God said, really? It's time, get in front of the camera. And I was like, oh, hell no. Because I was like, what am I doing? And it was just like, I looked down and I saw live stream, and I was like, I am not live streaming. Because I was like, that's for a bunch of 20-year-olds and teens. And they're all like, get on the camera and start live streaming. Had I not done that, Lady J, we would not be here right now.
Man, listen. But when he speaks, like I said, there are some of us who are called to be.
You were fighting.
Listen, I was like, because not only did it have everything in there about, like, a lot of things about my, my life story, and I had to tell it in a way where I told my story and was careful not to tell other people's story, because my story intertwined with other people.
Oh, got it. Okay.
And so while the people are mentioned, I changed the names, of certain people, but like, maybe some of the things that happened to my siblings, or, I didn't tell their story because that's their story to tell, but I told the parts that, were directly impacted me without, telling their story. And then I had to go into, like the things I did, the mistakes I made, how I got into being addicted to sex, and how I exposed my kids to certain things, and how it became a cycle. Like, all of these things were in here, and like showing like the steps that God took me through. He was my life support, which is why it's called life support. And I was like, you want me to put all of that out there? Are you serious? Like, no, absolutely not. So we went through this back and forth thing. Yes. And I noticed that the more I was resistant, the more disobedient I was, the more like little issues, the more it lead you.
Yeah, it lead you back to like, okay, I'm gonna do it?
Well, yeah, because when you are a child of God and you know better, when you don't do what he says do, like, God will tap you, and it's like, yes, his hand is heavy. Like, you don't want him to get you. Yes. So you might want to fall in line.
No, and even in just the more recent times, right? I've had people say to me, like, certain things just happen, and if you don't make that decision, God makes it for you. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Yes, right?
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely. And so I didn't release the book until 2015. It took me 5
years. I remember you saying that.
I had
a long dialogue, Lady J.
Listen. I had to get to a point where, see, my thing was, I was so worried about how people were going to see me. And I've never been a person to like care about what people thought, but I'm like, this is now, I'm completely undressing in front of like everybody, like the world, everybody's gonna see this. And then I'm like, well, what is my family gonna say? And there were certain people that I reached out to let them know that I was writing the book, just so they like weren't caught off guard. And yeah, it took me 5 years. And when I released it, I was at the point where I didn't care anymore, about what people thought, how they saw me, because I understood that, one, I was still standing without the help of any of them. It was all God, and there was nothing. And I understood that I had reached a level of freedom that most people wish they could get to. So many people out here are so afraid of, what people are going to say or what's going to get out there, because they're trying to hide this stuff or portray themselves to be one way, and there's such a freedom in, because it's not something that people can use now, what I'm saying, against you, or to try to tear you down or make you feel some type of way, or to maybe stop your business or whatever. It's already out there now. Anything that you want to know, I've already said, or maybe on my way to saying it. Or if you ask me, I really probably won't have an issue with telling it. So there is such a freedom. It's like a level up of freedom.
It's like very liberating, right?
Yes,
On so many levels, whether it's to free yourself, like what you said, if it's outside looking in, they can't say anything to you. It's all out there.
Yes. And I realized that in that alone, outside of the anointing of my life, there's a power in that. There's a power in that. So yeah, that's when but at that time I was like, okay, all right, God, I got it. I'm gonna let it go. And so in 2015, that's what happened.
Wow. So now you've been on this journey now since that time. Do you believe truly at that point is when everything started to shift for you?
Oh yeah. When I released the book, it spread like wildfire. I was not expecting, like I didn't have the goal of being like a bestseller and none of that. But people started getting a hold of the book, and they were like, oh my, people who know me, they were like, oh my God, you how did we not know, or that's what happened at that time, or that's why you were always, looking, or, saying this or looking that way or whatever. And then it got into like the hands of Job Corps. And then from there, it was like over. Like, organizations started buying them in the bulk, and, asking me to come and speak. And then all of the young people and even some families were like, man, okay, so tell me, how did you get to here? Like, what did you do? Like, so then I started teaching and having these interactive sessions. So the way God gave it to me was, he was like, I want you to do this. Like, it has to be a visual to go along with this. People can truly understand and grasp what it is that is happening when you're holding on, or when you're in this phase of your life, and how to get from point A to point B. And so it was very, I was so happy that I was able, that my story was able to help other people. But then it got to be, I'll say, scary. I don't know if you know what it's like to be scared of success, but it got too big. So, the word talks about your gift making room for you. But I was speaking to like hundreds and hundreds of young people, like Michigan, Indiana, Atlanta, Chicago. And it was like everybody only wanted to speak to Lady J. I started bringing other people in, and everybody was just like, I was kind of like being bombarded, and it was overwhelming. But at the same time, it was like, God, I don't want to be responsible like for all of these people. Like, this is not what I had in mind when you said that you had me on assignment with this. So then I started taking a step back and start.
Well, that's what I'm saying, right? Like, you don't, when you say yes to either a calling or something, you don't know. I mean, you might have an idea what you think you might want it to be. But once it starts rolling, you're like, what?
Yes.
And it's much bigger. You realize it's much bigger than you.
Exactly. And anything that you're doing for God or fulfilling your purpose in life, it's always going to be bigger than you. because it's not about you. And that's when I really understood the first time I spoke. It was in September of 2015. I'll never forget it because I'm used to singing. I'm used to singing everywhere, you know. And so now I'm like into speaking. Like I don't speak, but the very first time that I got up there, and within the first sentence, the whole entire room, it was a room of 250 young people and like 20 staff members. Mm-hmm. And within the first sentence, you could hear a pin drop in the room. And I mean, it was that way the entire time. I was there for 2 hours. I spoke, I think, for maybe 45 minutes. And then I did a demonstration to go along with what I was speaking. But halfway in, I mean, I brought some people with me just in case, you know, we needed to, like, it went somewhere else. And I was so glad I did. I think God had me do that. But like, there were so many young people just bawling. And so like people were going over like embracing them and kind of, you know, talking to them. And then they just kind of like, once I got done, everybody had questions, you know, came up to the podium. I was like, oh, okay, so this is what you planned on doing with this. Okay. And so I was like, okay, I can get with that. But then it was like, so then it was after school programs, then it was schools, then it was another job corps, and then so by the time I knew, I was going to like 10 different places every week. And it was a lot. And it was scary, but and overwhelming. And it was just like, okay, God, I don't know if I can do this. And so I started taking a step back and just delving into one of my other talents and gifts that he's given me in business. I love business, and a lot of people think that's boring, but you know, I do. So business development was my thing in corporate world, business development, management, things of that sort. So that's what I started doing. And I started slowly but surely falling off of, you know, speaking and going to doing sessions, and found myself, you know, I'll say overexerting myself, just work, becoming a workaholic. I was running from my calling, if you will. And that triggered something physical in me, because then I had this mindset, I got to get this done. It has to be done now, you know, and I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating, and my blood pressure got out of control. And God kept having people tell me, you need to sit down, you need to slow down. This is not what you're supposed to be doing 24/7. You know, this is not what, and I wouldn't listen. And one day I found myself, you know, in the hospital for a ruptured brain aneurysm.
Which is why right now, Lady J, you have sunglasses on.
Yes. Yep. August 22nd of 2019. I'll never forget that day.
You know, it's interesting. I've met people in my lifetime that have like had either a spiritual like calling or an epiphany. There's so many different words you could term it, right? And then they experienced it, and then they followed God. And then all of a sudden, like it started, you know, it started turning. Like you really know it's going to start to turn because you could really see it. But then a lot of things started getting in the way. Like, and this is not just your story. Right. I've heard other stories. And then it's like they got so big or like, you know, for whatever reason, and then they deviate away from it, and then something happens. Like, and that's why I know, like for myself, even when I have the calling, there's a part of me that also understands that as much as this podcast is, you know, is experiencing a lot of success, that what remains is still the message for me that I have to always deliver. Because if I don't keep myself in check, God will keep me in check.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you never know, you know, and I tell people all the time, people use this as a cliche, but when the word talks about obedience being better than sacrifice, believe you me, that is 100% true. Because had I known that the price I would have to pay would be damaged, I'm 30, well, I'll be 38 this year, but when that happened to me, I was 36. So I went through 17 months of rehab. And they didn't even know that I was gonna make it. So I mean, funeral arrangements were made. Most people don't live within the first 48 hours, let alone the first 10 days. So
God said, one more chance.
Listen, I don't think that, looking back, I don't think that his intention was to take me out. I think his intention was to get my attention and understand that I'm not allowed to deviate from
The calling,
the
or
calling that he has on
yeah,
my
or
life.
the assignment.
Yes. And a lot of people say, well, God doesn't do things like that to us. He will allow things to happen when you don't listen. Yes, he will leave you to your own. Sometimes he'll even give us things that we continue to beg him for, even though he knows that we're not ready for it, or that's not his will for our lives, just so we can see that we can't handle it, or it's not what we really want.
Oh
He
no,
will do that. He will do
I
that.
believe it. There
Yeah,
are
he will do
things you
that.
can't. I mean, I've seen so many stories already being able to do this podcast. And, whether it's my guest or whether I just have like advisors or hearing so many stories, I've just heard there are things that happen that you cannot control. And it could be like
Exactly.
you're on your way and boom, something happens because
Yep.
it's to deviate you or move you back into that
Yep.
place where you stay on, on
Yep.
mission.
Yep. And we have to remember too, because what a lot of people say also is the enemy, the enemy, the enemy. Yes, the enemy definitely works. He is awesome at what he does. Um, but also a lot of the times it's not the enemy, it's ourselves, because we put ourselves in situations as well based on our own decisions. Now, I will say that I do feel like when the enemy knows that you have a certain level of anointing or power and calling over your life, it's his job to try to keep you from that, because he understands that if you succeed, that's a dangerous thing for him. That's a dangerous thing
Yes.
for him. And so that is, I know, understand now that is what happened with me. And I have struggled now from that time until now to accept that this is the new me, and I have to do things differently because, like I said, there's damage to my eyes, cognitive issues that I have.
Hmm.
There's damage to my ears. Bleeding in the brain causes stroke. So my right side, there are so many different things, and in the physical, or I'll say medical sense, they're looked at as limitations or handicaps. So now I'm just like, okay, God, now how am I supposed to do this? Well, now this is, this is where I am. And so uh, he also doesn't call you without already equipping you.
Yes.
So even though he's allowed that to happen, I have to remind myself, I have to constantly remind myself, because then my confidence levels kind of went down,
Hmm.
that he doesn't bring you to something that he won't bring you through. And
Yeah.
so accepting the new me and having to grieve the old me and stop comparing, the ways I used to do things and who I was before to what I can do now and who I am now or how I have to do it. I had to stop doing that, because the more I did that, the more the enemy kept me in the mindset
Oh
where, yeah,
yeah.
you're not gonna be able to do, you're not gonna be able to, it's never gonna be
Oh,
as successful as it was
I
before. So
I mean, I even just had a recent experience very similar to that, where it almost like kind of just like it would have just brought me down. And then I had the love of like my family and my, my advisors, my spiritual advisors, and all that kind of stuff. And I was able to bounce back because they're saying sometimes, like the enemy wants to get you, or like they want anything to bring down your light. You know what I mean?
right, right,
And shock you
exactly.
so then you just won't. And I was like, oh my gosh, I got to do
Hmm.
this and I've got to rise above it. And I think that's why
Right.
it's so important for us, like myself and you, Lady J, to keep telling the stories,
Oh yes.
to bounce back to so you show others that you can bounce back. And as you keep bouncing back, they don't become so far. Like when it used to take me years to recover from a situation,
Oh yes. Yeah.
right?
Right.
Now you're just like,
Hmm.
whatever,
Hmm.
like
Yep.
it's,
Yep.
and that's why healing is definitely necessary.
Oh yes. And I talk about, excuse me, I'll talk about the phases that took me through, and these are the same phases that I give or that I teach to other people.
Hmm.
When you are trying to overcome trauma, because a lot of people don't understand that when it comes to mental health, when it comes to mental health, it's a direct result of, trauma, usually outside of like a chemical imbalance in the brain or something, or some type of learned behavior. But when people go to therapy and things of that sort, I tell people all the time, therapy by itself is usually only extremely effective when a person has gotten past the stage of like the initial impact of the trauma, and also working through the steps of like addressing the root of the issue, of forgiveness, whether that's forgiving themselves or others and things of that sort, because there needs to be some sort of marriage between therapy and a quote unquote, if you will, sponsor. So when people are like dealing with drugs or alcohol, they team them up with a sponsor, somebody who has already walked that walk. But for some reason, we don't do that when it comes to mental health. And it's very important for people to connect with other people. So if you are, let's just say, Lisa, that you were abused, in your childhood, that you, were a rape victim or a childhood rape victim, or it would be beneficial to you for you to be paired with somebody that you can identify with, that can relate to you, because they can truly understand what you're going through and help you through that process and give you some tips that a therapist couldn't. Because at the end of the day, when you bring in a licensed therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and this is coming from somebody who I do have a degree in psychology myself. When you do that, those people 9 times out of 10 have not gone through any of those things. They are coming to you from a place of theory and what they read in a book and what they were taught in class, and studies. And while that stuff is necessary from a clinical standpoint, there are other facets like spiritual, emotional, that you have to address in trauma. And so going through the step of resuscitation, or I say there's 5 phases. So you have resuscitation, operation, reflection, release, and then rebuild. Those are the 5 phases that you go through, or that everyone should go through, to truly overcome trauma. Otherwise, you'll find yourself just coping. So a lot of therapists have this thing called a behavioral contract. And they come along with a list of coping skills or mechanisms.
Okay.
I teach from a place where I like to do the dirty work, get my hands dirty and get to the root. So a lot of that stuff addresses the symptoms. So it addresses the depression, it addresses maybe suicidal ideation, but those aren't the root issues. It's kind of like putting the Band-Aid over a bullet wound. Exactly. If you don't go in and do the surgery, eventually you'll get an infection, it'll move or something, and you'll die. So if you deal with the root, then those symptoms will subside. They will take care of themselves.
Yes.
So I teach people that I'm sorry. No, you're fine. If you want to overcome something and not just cope, coping suggests that you are accepting where you are and what has taken place, and then you learn how to coexist with that. So you're just constantly finding defense mechanisms, coping mechanisms to just get through the day.
Yes.
That's not really living.
You're not getting to the root. Yes.
Exactly. To overcome something, you are actually actively using those coping mechanisms as a transitional, tool, understanding that you're accepting these things, but you're also doing the work to now gain control over that which has control over you. And you learn how to live, and you understand that you're not tagging it along. So, there's this demonstration that I do where we tie ourselves to these strings. And at one point you're trying to move, but you're tied to the string. And so once you go through those steps, you cut the string is still attached to you, but it no longer has you bound, like you can still move. So yes, it's always going to be a part of me, my story, the trauma, things that I've gone through, the mistakes that I've made, the decisions that I made, my mindset, all of that is still a part of my story, but I have control over it now. Now it's a tool. It transitioned from something that happened to me to something that I can use for me.
Yes. No, absolutely. You're absolutely right, because that's what I'm saying, that for me, even in my healing journey, the emotional traumas that I had been through, it takes a long time. But if you do the work, it really does make those healing, that those times when you bounce back, so much shorter. It really
Yep.
does. So I'm so glad that you are sharing that work. And is that, now tell me, I mean, like these hours just go by so fast. And I know we were just getting into the nitty gritty, but
Mhm.
now that you've gone through, you're bouncing back even from this brain aneurysm, like moving forward, is your focus going to be like the children, and is it going to go back into speaking? Where are we seeing Lady J and bounce back into this next year and moving forward?
So I'm definitely going to get back into, I'll say, the live interactive sessions, the bounce back sessions. I am trying to figure out how I want to go about that. So I definitely can't do it the way I used to do it before. So I can't travel to 10 different places every week. My physical, body won't allow that. I still have the aneurysm in my head. There's a coiling up there. So I have to be mindful about what I do and how much I do so that I don't end up, back at square one. So along with what I do with my media company, so utilizing that platform to reach more people on a wider level, on a
Yeah.
wider scale, is one of the ways that I am able to deliver this to other people.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, what I think I'm going to do is, or what I've been working on actually, is creating a virtual course of the actual, bounce back interactive sessions. So that way people can
Nice.
come on and join virtually, because I won't be able to travel and do, I mean, I can travel, but I just can't do it as much. So
Yeah.
if so that it's not limited to, certain people, I think that doing it that way and speaking. So whether it's at, women's empowerment or, doing interviews, things of that sort, because a lot of people are either going to ask me about business or they're going to ask me about, life support or, the bounce back series. So between those two, I think using the virtual platforms and my media in the multimedia company, the television, radio, magazine, continuing to do that, is preparing me to get back into doing that, like full time. It's a
Yeah.
little bit scary just because it feel like I've been gone like forever. So
Don't
I'm
be
just like, I'm hoping
scared.
that it works.
This is, and you know what, now with everything that's happened, Lady J, there's so much more support out there. I feel like with the pandemic happening, there's a lot of people that are really stepping into their power and supporting each other
Yeah,
in these pursuits. So you
definitely.
definitely, like I said, we're both in assignment. We're both on assignment right now, and I'm here. I'm so happy that I could use this platform to share your work. So what I wanted, so with that, with everything that you're doing, what would be the best way for the audience if they'd like to get a hold of you, and or actually get your book? What would be the best way? Do you have a website that they can go to? I'll definitely put this on the description box as well.
Okay, yeah. They can go to www.ladyj.co. That's ladyj.co. So that is the best way. I really don't want to give social media links. I mean, you can find, but I have like 13 different pages because there are
It'll
pages
probably,
that are for my platforms and things of that sort. So it's just too many. So
yes.
just go to ladyj.co. Everything about me, all of my brands, things that I do are there. You can purchase books there. You can fill out forms to book me, for any, as a speaker or to interview me. You can, you know, um, fill out the interview form to be interviewed on one of my shows, the Impossible Radio Show, which is all about overcoming the impossible. If you have
Yes.
a business or something that you that you want to promote, you can sign up for Business Banger Spotlight. So it's everything is there, ladyj.co.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lady J, for coming on the 8 Billion podcast and sharing your story. I absolutely wish you all the best in your future journey. I know you're going to do amazing. You've definitely bounced back, and you are very inspiring to me as well as the audience, I'm sure. So Best of luck in the future. And like I said, you could always use this platform again to maybe share your story. I've been telling all my guests, I'd love for you to come back and share your story, because I know this is just the beginning again of another chapter for you.
Oh yeah, listen. First, let me just say I love what you're doing. Like I said, this caught my eye when I ran across this. So I was just like, let me see what this is. So I love what you're doing. I'm so elated that I was able to come on and share my story. So thank you so much for having me. What you're doing is amazing. Continue to do that, because I think more people telling their stories, and not just telling your story, but being able to also leave your listeners with something tangible or practical that they can use is very important as well. So, with the 8 billion project, it's amazing. Of course, I would be more than happy to come back. I know an hour, definitely, you don't get to touch on everything. So
I know, that's what I'm saying. I was like, we're only starting to get into, because you got to tell the backstory first. And then everything else starts to make sense, right? Then, that's often what happens on these podcasts. But like I said, I know for sure I'm going to end up having a lot of guests that come back, and it'd be really nice to actually see where that next chapter of your life is taking you. So thank you again so much for being on the 8 Billion podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Everyone, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of the 8 Billion podcast. Thank you, and we will see you on next week's 8 Billion podcast. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If it's moved you in any way, please review and share your thoughts, or text me your thoughts at 949-247-2800.